apologize for my voice today, but it's getting the best of me. Well, we're in that time of year when you're doing your budgets, you're looking forward to what 2021 holds. With the pandemic, there's a lot of uncertainty about revenues coming in and what you're going to use it for. So I know that's difficult for you to try to plan that out. But one of the things that I know you're taking into consideration for your budgets for next year is your salaries that you're going to pay your employees and your elected officials as well. And that leads to the salary ordinance. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about salary ordinances, things that you need to include or we would like to see included, because we do get a lot of questions on salary ordinances, and some people wait till the very end of the year to do it. Some people wait until January of the next year to do their salary ordinances. But I think now is a really good time to do them because you're already in that mindset of salaries and budgets, so you know how much you want to budget to pay a certain class of employees or a certain department. So now's a great time to go ahead and establish that in your salary ordinance. The statutory requirements for cities and towns can be found in these code sections. 36-4-7-2 is elected city officials. 36473 is appointed officers, deputies, and other employees of the city. And 36474 deals with employees connected in the operation of a utility. 36833 is for police and fire under a public safety board. Indiana Code 8-1.5-3-4 is for utilities with a utility service board. And 1.5-4-4 does talk about any units that have a waterworks board. On the other side for towns, it's 36532 deals with elected town officials, the town marshal, and other town employees. Again, 1.5-3-3 and 4-4 deal with utility service boards or waterwork boards. If you happen to be a unit that has a board of metropolitan police commissioners, you want to look at Indiana Code 36-8-9. This board recommends to the council the compensation that are paid to police officers. So why do you need an ordinance in the first place? Well, it's because statute requires it. For cities and elected officials, it's Indiana Code 36472B, and it states that the legislative body shall, by ordinance, fix the annual compensation of all elected city officers. While on the town side, 36532B requires the same for town council members, the clerk treasurer, and the town marshal. And it also provides that the legislative body shall provide reasonable compensation for other town officers and employees. So this slide is when to adopt an ordinance. Well, our position is you should have an ordinance adopted each year for that next calendar year. For cities, there's a statute has to be adopted no later than November the 1st. For towns, while there is no statutory deadline, our position is one should be adopted prior to the end of the year. Again, during the budget process is a good time to pass your salary ordinance for next year because you've already set or about to set and approve appropriations for salaries for that next year. So now's a good time. If an ordinance isn't adopted, and we get this question quite a lot, and we see it in some of our audits, our position is the prior ordinance would be the basis for the payment. It would still be in effect. So if you haven't adopted a salary ordinance for 2 or 3 years, we would expect people to be paid in accordance with that one from 2 or 3 years ago. We get a lot of questions about what exactly is compensation. And for cities, Indiana Code 36-4-7-2A, provided it's the total of all money paid for performing duties as a city officer. In 2019, there was additional definition added that compensation now includes all benefits that are paid, including insurances, retirements, and pensions. Now, the slide that you have might look a little different. I noticed that I had left the word city in this slide. You know, we're talking about town, so I corrected it on the version that's on the screen. But you might see that lined out on the, if you went to our website and downloaded the documents there. The four towns, the wording is the same, it's just in a different section, so it's in 36-532A. And it's a total of all monies paid to town officers. And again, the bottom paragraph, that sentence was added a couple of years ago, that compensation includes all employee benefits that are paid. Cities and towns also had new language added in 2019 in their respective statutes that for the purposes of determining an increase or decrease in compensation, that some things are not to be included or factored into that equation. They are payments by the city or town for insurance premiums on behalf of the official and payments in recognition of longevity, professional certifications, or educational advance. It also talks about stipends or per diems or payments that are authorized by 36-474 for cities and 36-532D for towns. So I thought it'd be a good idea to go through an example. Here I've shown 2 years, 2019 and 2020. As a clerk treasurer, as the elected official, you know, there's the provision that your compensation can't be less in the next year, can be less in a year than it was the preceding year. So I wanted to kind of see how the new language on what is not to be considered would play into that. So let's say in 2019, the clerk treasurer's salary is $50,000 and the town pays on their behalf an insurance premium of $2,500. So the total compensation per the statutes for cities and towns would be $52,500 in 2019. Now we move to 2020, we'll say there's no raise involved, so the base salary of the clerk treasurer is still $50,000. The insurance premium changed. Let's say you went with a different policy from a different group, and now the town wasn't going to kick in as much. They're only going to pay $1,500 toward that. Or maybe you had a clerk treasurer that was married on a family plan in 2019, and maybe they're not married in 2020, so they're on the single plan. That could be also a reason for it to go down. So their compensation would be $51,500. Obviously, $51,500 is less than $52,500, but this would not be considered a decrease in compensation because those insurance premiums are not to be included in the determination of an increase or decrease in compensation. So what didn't change was the requirement the compensation of an elected official that it can't be changed in the year for which it's fixed, nor reduced below the previous year. So that example, as I said, those different amounts going from 19 to 20 is not considered a reduction. Another new item, the compensation of an elected official cannot be based on the number of hours worked. We've seen in the past a few instances where compensation for an elected official is in the salary ordinance as an hourly rate. We've always advised against that. And now by statute, it's no longer allowed. So you can't be compensated on any number of hours worked. In the past, there was always that rumor that maybe you've heard your predecessor talk about, or you've heard through the grapevine now since you've been in office, that every clerk treasurer had to work at least one day a year. That was all that was required, that they worked one day. That was just a rumor. We don't know where that came from. There was never anything in statute that said you had to work one day. As an elected official, there are really no set hours, but now the General Assembly's cleared that up. We feel by putting the wording in that you can't be compensated based on the number of hours worked, whether it's 1 hour a year or, you're there every day. So to kind of summarize our audit positions for elected officials, an elected official's compensation is the total paid for duties as a city or town officer and includes insurance, disability, and retirement benefits. It still cannot be changed during the year in which it's fixed. It can't be reduced below the previous year, but payments for certain types of payments are not considered for determining increases or decreases in compensation. And I'm sure you would hear Susan and I say, if you were to ask us one-on-one, we know each city and town is different. They have different ordinances and everybody's got different circumstances. So these slides are really our audit position. They're not a legal opinion. We continue to recommend that you consult with an attorney for their legal advice. And we would always take their written legal opinions into consideration during an audit if questions arose. So to this point, we've discussed elected officials. But what about non-elected officials? Cities have their own statute, 36473. The states that, subject to the approval of the legislative body, the city executive shall fix the compensation of each appointed officer, deputy, or other employee. And the legislative body may reduce, but can't increase any compensation that's fixed by the mayor. And as I mentioned earlier, the compensation's got to be fixed for cities. That salary ordinance has to be adopted by November the 1st. It can be increased or decreased by the executive during the budget year for which it's fixed. Again, this is for employees. These are non-elected officials. In second-class cities with city clerks, there's a provision that city clerk can, with the approval of the council, fix the salaries of deputies and employees that are appointed in the clerk's office under 36.411.4. And remember, and it states this in the statute, that 36.473 doesn't apply to city police and fire members. Because they have their own statute. That's why it doesn't apply to police and fire. So 36.833, the letter D, says the annual compensation of all members and other appointees shall be fixed by the ordinance of the legislative body by no later than November 1st. And if the legislative body fails to adopt, the Public Safety Board can fix members of police and fire, can fix their compensation. So again, take a look at 36.833 for your police and fire. Non-elected town employees are included in 36.532. Their compensation is fixed in the same salary ordinance that the elected officials are set in. The compensation of town employees can be changed by council through an ordinance amendment during the year. And for utility employees, there's probably an error on the information if you downloaded it from our website prior to today, but the Utility Service Board, this should be IC 8-1.5-3-4. If you download the slide earlier, it says 3-3, so that's wrong. Public Waterworks Board under 4-4. But these salaries are set by these boards for utility employees. We get this question occasionally, so we wanted to point it out. It only applies to towns. So we're not aware of any authority for a city elected official to waive their compensation. But a town elected official can. Example, you may have a council member that may want to help the town out financially and not take pay for the next year. Well, in order to do so, under 36536, the clerk treasurer has to be notified prior to January 1st in writing. And everyone needs to understand that that waiver includes all compensation, including benefits. So it's not just the actual paycheck, but they're waiving their right to health insurance, life insurance, and pension benefits. So you can't get into a situation where the salaries get waived, but the insurance is still provided. We've had that situation come up a couple of times where the clerk treasurer wanted to not take the salary, but wanted to be able to keep the insurance for certain reasons, and we don't think you can do that under this statute. So what are some things you want to make sure you get in your salary ordinance? Well, you want to get obviously the base salary or the dollar amount, any longevity pay that your council is going to provide, bonuses. We get a lot of questions toward the end of the year about bonuses. So maybe you've got extra cash on hand, council wants to give a bonus to employees. Maybe they didn't have, weren't sure how the year was going to play out, so they didn't give any raises. So now we've got some cash at the end of the year and we give a bonus. That needs to be in the salary ordinance. If you get to the end of the year and your bonuses aren't already in the salary ordinance and you want to give them, you would have to amend your salary ordinance to permit the bonus. That's a question we get a lot about, if bonuses can be paid, and yes, they can, but they have to be a part of your salary ordinance. Overtime is another issue to include in your salary ordinance. And your benefits. Indiana Code 5-10-6-1 requires that leave benefits to be set by ordinance. Now, sometimes we see those instead of the salary ordinance, we might see them in the personnel policy handbook. And we're okay with that as long as that policy is documented as being adopted by council at some point. So a lot of times when those handbooks or personnel policies get updated, they go before council to be approved, and maybe they're in effect for, until the next time something has changed. But so it doesn't technically have to be in the salary ordinance. You probably should refer to the personnel policy or the handbook on those types of things. And if we saw that in an audit, then we would go there and we would audit to whatever the policy was in effect during the audit period. And your leave benefits, be clear on certain situations like termination. Are you going to pay accrued leave benefits out when an employee leaves the city or town? That needs to be in your ordinance. Whether they can, accrued leave balances can be rolled over from year to year. And the number of days of leave that's being accrued and the frequency, like is it 1 day a month, or do you get 2 weeks of vacation a year, or do you get up front? I've seen some places that give all the vacation, in January, and the person has until the end of the year to use that. Just be clear on that, especially the termination, because we've seen recently some people, they leave employment and maybe council wants to pay theirs out, but because of a circumstance, they want to pay it out just to that employee. It needs to apply to everyone. So that if Susan and I both, quit today, and she got her leave paid out, then I should probably get my leave paid out too. So make sure if you're having somebody leave and there's that circumstance and it's not called for in your ordinance, then council would have to amend the ordinance or the policy on paying out that accrued leave at termination. Park employees have a special provision to be aware of in 3610.3. So the park board kind of deals with that, and there's an Attorney General opinion from 1989 that you might want to find and look at regarding park employees, but it says the park board can change the compensation of park employees at any time. And we get asked frequently about adding new positions during the year. Yes, of course, you can add new positions during the year, but in order to pay those people, You gotta know how much, and that's where the salary ordinance comes in. You're gonna have to amend your salary ordinance for a new position to get included in the amendment, how much you're going to pay for this new position. Other considerations are names versus positions. And try not to put specific names in your salary ordinance, but list it by position. I think most cities and towns already do that, but we still see a few that pop up every once in a while that list Jane Doe as the clerk treasurer. Well, if Jane leaves, then you would have to amend the salary ordinance because the new person coming in would not be named Jane Doe. That ordinance in that situation just authorizes to pay Jane Doe a certain amount. Instead, have it be the clerk treasurer's position and the amount to be paid. And we've always recommended biweekly paydays. So your ordinance could say you're going to pay $1,000 biweekly, and that helps when you get to the end of the year or in a 26 or a 27 pay year. There's always that question of, oh, we didn't. Somebody's getting shorted a pay, or how do we do that? And if you got biweekly pays, then all you have to do is pay that amount every 2 weeks. And you don't run it. The only thing you need to be concerned with there is if you have the appropriation and the money for it. You don't have to worry about that 26 and 27 pay thing. And then if you use pay ranges, we see that quite often. We need documentation as to how it's determined that each person is to be paid within that range. So for example, Susan and I, if we were an employee at your town and there was a pay range of $50,000 to $75,000, we would need to see documentation of who determined how much Susan was going to get paid within that range, and how much I was going to get paid. But it might be the same, it might be different because one of us has more experience, or certifications or something that might require a higher salary. But just make sure you document who decides that. And that way, when we're doing our testing, if Susan and I come up in a payroll test, we'll know that each of us is being paid the right amount because we'll have that documentation. This is another position that we've taken in our advice that we've recommended in the past for cities. If you don't adopt your salary ordinance by November the 1st, we're going to request the written legal opinion from an attorney that adopting it after November the 1st is not in non-compliance with the statute. And the law, or the statute in this case, where it says November the 1st, it doesn't have any provisions for what happens if you don't do that. So this may be a good time to take home rule into effect, and maybe say under home rule you're doing it later, but you want to get something from your attorney. If you go after November 1st, that's okay that's okay to go after November the 1st, and why. And I mentioned this a few slides back, but if you don't adopt one at all, our position is the last one adopted would be the one in effect, and that's what we would audit to. Do we have any questions on?
We did have several questions.
Okay, several. Good.
Let's see, how do you include biweekly amounts for hourly employees? For example, hourly employees may have overtime or have on-call pay.
Yeah, I should have been more clear on that. The biweekly would be for your salaried employees. If you've got hourly employees, then you would have the hourly rate in the ordinance. So it'd be, $15.75 an hour for this position, or your town manager that you're paying it every 2 weeks. As a salaried employee, you would just have that biweekly rate in there. So yes, for hourly, you would want to have hourly rates in your salary ordinance.
Okay, another one, if the elected clerk treasurer is also the municipal clerk, and the town board specify what hours the clerk treasurer must be open for the utility side, since the clerk treasurer is getting a portion, and it cut off the rest of it.
Yeah, I found out when I was answering some questions earlier, when Susan was presenting, there's a limited number of characters you can put in that Q&A. Would you mind reading it again? I'm sorry.
Yes. If the elected clerk treasurer is also the municipal clerk, can the town board specify what hours the clerk treasurer must be open for the utility side?
That's probably a question for an attorney. If the elected clerk treasurer is also the municipal clerk,
Okay.
I don't know if they mean the municipal city clerk or like the utility clerk, billing clerk.
Well, it says must be open for the utility side.
For the utility side, okay, that confused me a little bit, sorry. If the clerk treasurer is also the utility billing clerk, and that position is separate on like the salary ordinance, as in that's a separate position, and the clerk treasurer just happens to hold both of those. The position that we've taken is we believe that council could set the hours that the utility office is going to be open and have staff available there. But like I said before, that's probably a question for your attorney to address on whether council could do that. I don't know that it would be anything we would get much involved with during an audit as to whether council had set hours and whether those had been adhered to or not. It would be more of a legal issue if council had the ability to do that or not.
Yeah, this one too may also be a legal issue. If a prior clerk treasurer was paid an additional amount over and above the salary for duties related to utility billing, and then those duties are removed, what happens then?
Yeah, I would agree that is probably a question for your attorney in that situation where a prior clerk treasurer was paid additional for the utility billing and collection, and then that function got removed for the current person.
The next one, is there anything in the statute that says the clerk treasurers are eligible for health insurance, or is this up to council?
I don't know of anything in statute that says they have to be.
Right.
So, well, the position that we've normally taken is that if benefits like health insurance are provided to any group of employees, it's normally available to everyone, which would include elected officials.
Right, and I have a couple more here. The salary ordinance was not passed for 2020. This is the town. Can this still be completed, or should they do an amendment, or what?
If you don't have one for 2020, you could pass one. I would assume that they're paying based on the ordinance that was in effect previously. So maybe for 2019, let's hope. Trying to think for employees, they could go ahead and do that, but how would that affect an elected official whose salary can't be changed in the year in which it's fixed?
Yeah, I think for employees, they could do an amendment this year, but no, I don't. You can ask an attorney, but I think it would be our position that you could not change the compensation of an official, because technically it has been fixed for this year by not passing a salary ordinance for 2020. So employees, yes, an amendment. Elected officials, no. You'd have to wait until next year. Next question. Do I need to draw up a new ordinance for a change in health care for employees?
I'm not sure. Did healthcare start getting provided during the year, so you didn't have a provision for it, or they're going to start providing it for next year, or they've always given it and it's just never been addressed? I think
all healthcare benefits would have to be by ordinance of council, right?
Yes.
So if there's I guess it might depend on what that ordinance says. If it just says they're providing them healthcare and then you've changed your provider, the best thing to do with that question is ask the town or city attorney to see if you need a new ordinance. I think.
So there is an existing ordinance.
I don't know.
Okay, I
So-
think that was the part that I
yeah.
was confused about,
Right.
whether there was already one or not.
Right, you definitely need an
Yes.
ordinance to offer healthcare benefits.
Yes, you
Right.
you have to have an ordinance for that.
But if there's a change and you want to know if you need a new one, it would be best probably to talk to your city or town attorney. I think, wait a minute, there might be another question. This is kind of playing on your other one. So can the town council deny the clerk treasurer the opportunity to obtain health insurance through the town at the same benefits as all other full-time employees?
Attorney question there.
I think so, yeah, and that's all questions.
Yeah, because in that case, you're getting into the duties of council and the powers of the council, and those are more legal questions than they are audit questions, so.
That's all we have.
So that's it, okay. Well, we're almost at noon, a few minutes early, but I want to thank you for joining us. I hope it went smoothly enough for you. I hope those that had issues connecting early on were able to get connected eventually. I hope tomorrow to even be smoother than today. So if you have any questions after we sign off, you can choose emails again, and maybe we can address them in the morning. But we'll, I guess, see you back at 9 o'clock tomorrow for day 2. Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you for being here. We'll look
And
forward to tomorrow.
And we appreciate the questions too, and the interaction there. That's always nice to have. So we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.